Hey everybody, and welcome to a new kind of video format that we're going to be trying out, which is basically just going to be me talking at the camera for a little bit about something that is interesting that's been going on in technology or privacy or just news in the world that we think is relevant to Session and Oxen. So at the moment, the biggest thing going on in tech is, without a doubt, Elon Musk, Twitter. Everybody's been talking about it. Everybody's going to continue talking about it probably for the rest of the entire year. But there's something a bit more specific that I want to talk about today. Elon's been tweeting quite a lot about Twitter and his future schemes for the platform, what he wants to do with it. And today I'm going to talk about this tweet here where he discussed plans to add end-to-end encryption to Twitter DMs. Now, this is a very interesting proposition, I would say. Twitter obviously being, an open social media platform that historically you wouldn't really associate with privacy. It's the basis of it is that it's an open platform, as well as, the ongoing debate around end-to-end encryption, attempts from regulators to try and weaken encryption, and specifically Elon comparing his proposal of adding encryption to Twitter to Signal. So I think that's a really interesting comparison that he's made there. So first of all, let's just say off the bat, because I don't want people to think based on my talking points here that I'm against adding encryption to Twitter DMs, because I think that adding end-to-end encryption to Twitter DMs would be a profoundly positive thing to do, right? Adding encryption to things should always be encouraged, and I think that we should always, be advocating for more encryption, advocating for stronger encryption. More people using encryption is obviously a good thing. But there are some things that I think I want to pull Elon up on from this tweet that don't quite sit right with me. The first thing, right, he talks about no one being able to spy on your messages, no one being able to hack your messages. Now this, I wouldn't say is quite accurate to the situation. So say in this hypothetical, Twitter adds end-to-end encryption to their DMs, the rest of the platform remains the same. Now, okay, maybe the contents of your messages are now protected, but all of the DMs that you're sending are presumably still going to be connected to your very public account, which is likely an account that, your real identity is known either by Twitter or by anybody on the platform if you choose to use Twitter in that way. There's going to be a huge amount of metadata and behavioral information about your account that can then be associated with those messages. There's going to be a huge amount of metadata. The statement that you won't be able to be spied on, or your messages can't be spied on Twitter if end-to-end encryption is added to those DMs is pretty much just not true, right? Like, there's still a huge amount of information about you which is being exposed when you use a platform like that. And the reason that I have a problem with this is because, it's really important not to give people the wrong message, not to make people think that a platform is safer than it actually really is, right? Because that can lead to people using those Twitter DMs maybe in situations where they really shouldn't be. If they're an at-risk person and they use those DMs thinking that it's perfectly safe when actually it isn't, that could be really damaging. So I think it's important to just roll it back a little bit here. And I think this is a part of maybe a wider problem where people think that privacy begins and ends with encryption, or with end-to-end encryption more specifically, which really just isn't the case, right? There's so much more that goes into whether something can be considered private, whether something can be considered secure. And obviously, encryption is a huge part of that equation, but it's just not the only part. There are all these other moving pieces. And that brings me to, my second talking point here, which is, would end-to-end encrypted Twitter DMs be like Signal, right? The answer is very clearly no. Signal is end-to-end encrypted, and that's one of the major reasons that it rose to such popularity. Its encryption protocol is very well respected and well regarded. But there's also a whole other bunch of factors that make Signal something that people recommend, right? The Signal and the Signal Foundation, the Signal team has built up a lot of goodwill. The way that their infrastructure is operated, the way that they handle metadata and minimize metadata as much as they can, given their design, makes it a completely different environment and a completely different application than something like Twitter and Twitter's DMs would be, right? It's a purpose-built messaging application where really you've just got that one piece of information, your phone number, which is exposed, and Twitter has a much larger scope of information that it might have about you. So even if, to be honest, look at something like WhatsApp, right, which is rolling the entire Signal protocol, and even still, even though the protocol is the same, theoretically, people don't view WhatsApp the same way that they would view Signal, right? And there are lots of reasons for this, and it comes down to those extra external factors outside of the protocol that really contribute to whether something's considered private. And so even if not only was there end-to-end encryption, but they rolled the entire Signal protocol through the Twitter DMs, it would still not be equivalent to something like Signal. And suggesting that it would be, or suggesting that it would be the same, is really not something that I think we should be doing. So yeah, I think, don't get me wrong, I think encryption in Twitter DMs obviously a really great idea, and it gives more people access to encryption that maybe aren't using it at all at the moment, right? Like maybe those people don't have Signal, or they don't have WhatsApp, they don't have Session. So, it would actually be a huge upgrade for them, and that's why it is such a great thing. But, we need to moderate our expectations and have a more nuanced approach to the way that we view privacy and technology. Encryption is super important, maybe even the most important single factor, but it's not the only factor. And we need to keep that in mind when we're having these discussions about privacy, because otherwise, you paint a target on encryption's back, you overlook other factors that are also extremely important, like metadata, which is something that we've approached really heavily and had a lot of focus on when we've designed Session. So, with all these things in mind, props to you, Elon. I think it's a good idea to add end-to-end encryption to Twitter DMs, but just be careful the way that you talk about it, because, we don't want people to be using it in situations they shouldn't be. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and let us know what you think of this entire situation with Twitter and Elon Musk, or with end-to-end encrypted DMs. Do you think it would be a good thing, or do you think more or less, it's pointless? Let us know in the comments, and we'll see you next time. See ya.